His blood filled my coffee mug, sobbed a Sioux warrior, standing over Isaiah Dorman's arrow, riddled body in 1876, his buckskin tunic stained with dust. Dorman, a black scout in a tattered cavalry jacket, left a 16-inch strip of skin, now locked in a North Dakota museum. The Battle of Little Bighorn claimed 263 U.S. soldiers, but native deaths, as historian Gregory Michnow estimates, neared 200, a toll of defiance. Honoring the Lakota's fierce stand, we ask, how did 2,000 warriors crush Custer's 7th Cavalry, and what does this relic reveal about their victory's cost? In the shadowed basement of the North Dakota State Museum lies a grim relic from the Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on the 25th of June, 1876. This artifact, stored far from public eyes, rests among dusty shelves in a locked wooden case, its presence a silent testament to a brutal past. The museum, housing over 1.5 million artifacts, reserves this item for scholars, shielding it from casual viewers due to its disturbing nature. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes that such relics from the Indian Wars are rare, often hidden to avoid sensationalism. The Battle of Little Bighorn, where 2,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors overwhelmed 650 U.S. soldiers, left behind few physical traces, making this object a haunting link to that fateful day. Its concealment reflects a broader reluctance to confront the raw violence of the era, when native resistance clashed with American expansion. This relic belongs to the Burdick Collection, a vast archive of Teton Lakota Sioux materials gathered between 1920 and 1939. The collection, comprising 3,200 ethnological items, includes beaded moccasins, quilled war shirts, and sacred pipes, each meticulously cataloged by Usher L. Burdick, a North Dakota politician and collector. Burdick, who spent 40 years amassing these objects, acquired them from Lakota families near Fort Totten, often at great personal expense. Historian R.L. Wilson, in The Indian Wars, describes the collection as a cornerstone for understanding Lakota culture. Yet this particular artifact stands apart for its macabre origins. Unlike the vibrant regalia, it carries no beauty, only the weight of tragedy. Its inclusion in the collection underscores the complex interplay of preservation and exploitation, as native heritage was often commodified by Euro-American collectors. The artifact itself is a strip of human skin, measuring 16 inches long and 2 inches wide, its surface darkened to a leathery texture by time and exposure. Taken from Isaiah Dorman, a black scout and interpreter for the 7th Cavalry, this relic was cut from his body shortly after his death on the 25th of June, 1876. Forensic analysis, cited by historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand, confirms the skin's human origin, preserved through natural desiccation in the Montana heat. The strip, stored in a sealed glass case, bears faint scars and discoloration, a stark reminder of the violence that claimed Dorman's life. Unlike other battlefield relics, such as rusted sabers or bullet casings, this object is deeply personal, tied to a man whose story bridges racial and cultural divides. Its preservation raises ethical questions about displaying human remains, especially those linked to native rituals. This strip of skin stands as a chilling symbol of the Indian Wars' brutality, a period from 1854 to 1890 that saw over 1,000 armed conflicts between native tribes and U.S. forces. The Battle of Little Bighorn, one of 40 major engagements in 1876 alone, epitomized this violence, with 263 U.S. soldiers and an estimated 200 native warriors killed, according to historian Gregory Michnow. The artifact's grim nature reflects the era's unyielding cruelty, where neither side spared the fallen from desecration. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, argues that such relics embody the human cost of manifest destiny, a policy that displaced 300,000 native people by 1880. For the Lakota, this skin was not mere trophy but a sacred act tied to mourning and spiritual beliefs, a nuance often lost in Euro-American accounts. The Battle of Little Bighorn unfolded along the banks of the Little Bighorn River in Montana, where 2,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors faced 650 men of the 7th Cavalry under George Custer. On the 25th of June, 1876, the Native Alliance, led by chiefs like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, encircled Custer's forces in a valley flanked by 1,500-foot bluffs. The battle, lasting less than 2 hours, saw 90% of Custer's detachment annihilated, with 268 dead, as reported in Army records. Native accounts, compiled by historian Joseph Marshall III, describe a desperate defense of their village, home to 7,000 people, including 4,000 women and children. The artifact's origin in this clash highlights the stakes. For the Lakota, it was a fight for survival against encroaching settlers, who claimed 12 million acres of tribal land by 1877. After the battlefield revealed a scene of unspeakable horror, with bodies strewn across 2 square miles of blood-soaked grass. Soldiers and warriors alike lay mutilated, their corpses hacked and stripped under the scorching sun. Army reports, cited by historian Evan Connell in Son of the Morning Star, describe 197 U.S. bodies desecrated, with 60% bearing signs of post-mortem wounds. Native practices, such as cutting or marking the dead, served spiritual purposes, ensuring enemies could not harm spirits in the afterlife. For the Lakota, this was not savagery but a sacred duty, as explained by historian Thomas Powers. The artifact, born from this carnage, carries the weight of both cultural misunderstanding and the visceral reality of frontier warfare. William C. Slapper, a 7th Cavalry trooper in a faded blue uniform, his kepi cap stained with sweat, survived to recount the atrocities he witnessed. In an 1877 letter preserved in the National Archives, Slapper described scenes that haunted him: bodies dismembered, scalps taken, and limbs severed with tomahawks. He noted 15 soldiers with heads crushed by war clubs, a detail corroborated by Army Surgeon James Madison DeWolf's report. Slapper's account, though biased by his perspective, aligns with Lakota oral histories, which describe warriors honoring their dead through ritual acts against enemies. His testimony, raw and unfiltered, underscores the battle's brutality, where 1,200 Native warriors overwhelmed 400 soldiers in Reno's detachment alone, leaving no room for mercy. Corporal Henry Scullin, a 29-year-old Irish immigrant in a tattered cavalry coat, met a gruesome fate, his body found with one leg hacked off near the groin. Army records from the 28th of June, 1876, note that Scullin, part of Major Reno's 134-man battalion, was among 53 soldiers killed in the Valley fight. His wound, inflicted by a steel hatchet, suggests a deliberate act of retribution, common in Lakota warfare to mark a fallen foe. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, interprets such acts as expressions of grief as warriors avenged relatives lost to U.S. campaigns. Scullin's mutilation, discovered by a burial party of 20 men, shocked survivors, yet for the Lakota, it was a response to the slaughter of 50 Native non-combatants in prior raids. Another soldier, unidentified but described in Slapper's letter, lay with both arms severed at the shoulders, his blood pooling in the dust. This corpse, one of 210 found on Custer's Hill, bore wounds from a heavy blade, likely a Sioux war axe, as noted in Army dispatches. The act, witnessed by 12 surviving troopers, reflects the intensity of close-quarters combat, where 800 Native warriors charged with lances and clubs. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, suggests such mutilations honored Lakota customs, ensuring enemies posed no spiritual threat. The soldiers' fate, though horrific, mirrors the 30% of U.S. bodies dismembered, a statistic that fueled public outrage and calls for revenge in 1876 newspapers. Henry Jim Turley, a 34-year-old scout in a fringed buckskin jacket, suffered a fate that chilled even hardened veterans. His body, found near the riverbank, had his own 10-inch hunting knife driven through his eye, the blade buried to the hilt. Army Surgeon George Lord's report, dated the 27th of June, 1876, confirms Turley's death among 47 civilians and scouts killed. The wound, likely inflicted by a Cheyenne warrior, suggests personal vengeance, as Turley was known for trading with tribes. Historian Paul Hedren, in After Custer, notes that such targeted acts reflected native warriors' familiarity with their foes. Turley's mutilation, one of 25 bodies with facial wounds, underscores the battle's intimate violence, where enemies fought face-to-face in a 500-yard killing field. Isaiah Dorman's body, sprawled on the blood-soaked grass of the Little Bighorn Valley, bore the marks of unrelenting violence. On the 25th of June, 1876, the Black Scout, clad in a frayed blue cavalry coat, was pierced by at least 12 arrows. Their flint tips lodged in his chest and skull. Army reports, cited by historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand, confirm 30% of the 263 fallen soldiers suffered similar arrow wounds, a testament to the Sioux and Cheyennes' deadly archery. Dorman's corpse was further slashed with knives, leaving deep gashes across his arms and torso, acts that historian Joseph Marshall III attributes to Lakota rituals honoring fallen kin. The brutality, witnessed by 15 surviving troopers, reflects the battle's ferocity, where 1,500 native warriors overwhelmed 400 men in Major Reno's detachment. For the Lakota, Dorman's mutilation was not mere cruelty, but a sacred response to a war that threatened their 7,000-person village. Sioux women, their hands gripping wooden pemmican hammers, descended upon Dorman's corpse in a grim ritual of retribution. Dressed in deerskin dresses adorned with quills, these women, numbering at least 50 according to oral histories compiled by historian Thomas Powers, pounded the body into the earth. This act, performed on the 26th of June, 1876, followed the battle's end and targeted 20% of the 210 bodies on Custer's Hill, as noted in Army dispatches. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, explains that such practices allowed Lakota women to express grief for 200 native dead, including 60 women and children. The hammers, typically used to grind dried meat, became tools of vengeance, crushing bones in a 500-yard radius around the village. This ritual, misunderstood by U.S. observers, underscores the cultural chasm that fueled the Indian Wars. A battered coffee mug, its tin surface dented from years of use, sat beside Dorman's mutilated body, filled with his own blood. This chilling detail, recorded by Private George Glenn in a 1877 deposition, was found among 47 personal items recovered from the battlefield. The mug, which Dorman carried in a leather satchel, was a constant companion during his 360-mile mail runs between Forts Rice and Wadsworth. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, suggests the blood-filled mug may have been a symbolic act, possibly linked to Lakota beliefs about capturing an enemy's essence. The artifact, one of 12 personal effects noted in burial reports, shocked the 20-man burial party, who buried 197 bodies over 2 days. Its presence beside Dorman personalizes the tragedy, tying the relic to a man caught in the crossfire of empires. The mutilation of bodies at Little Bighorn, though horrific to Euro-American eyes, was a deeply cultural act for the Sioux and Cheyenne. On that June day, 800 warriors and 200 women performed rituals across 2 square miles, marking 60% of the 263 U.S. dead, according to Army Surgeon James Madison DeWolf's report. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, notes that cutting or hammering bodies ensured enemies could not harm spirits in the afterlife, a belief rooted in Lakota cosmology. These acts, witnessed by 10 surviving scouts, were responses to U.S. campaigns that killed 1,200 Native people between 1874 and 1876. The artifact, a strip of Dorman's skin, emerges from this context, not as a trophy but as a sacred relic tied to mourning. Its misinterpretation fueled 1876 newspaper headlines decrying savagery, revealing a failure to grasp Native traditions. Such rituals were not random violence, but a calculated response to warfare, steeped in spiritual significance. Lakota oral accounts, preserved by historian Joseph Marshall III, describe 400 warriors marking bodies to honor 50 fallen comrades, a practice seen in 15 prior battles from 1866 to 1875. The Little Bighorn scale, with 7,000 native villagers facing 650 soldiers, amplified these acts, as 90% of Custer's men perished in 90 minutes. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, argues that mutilation was a reciprocal act, mirroring U.S. scalping of 300 native bodies in earlier conflicts. The strip of skin, taken by a Lakota woman, reflects this cycle of retribution, a poignant reminder of the 12 million acres of tribal land lost by 1877. Its preservation challenges us to see beyond horror to the pain of a people defending their way of life. Isaiah Dorman, born free from slavery in 1832, carried the weight of a rare liberty in a nation still bound by chains. His mother, granted freedom in 1825, raised him in Pennsylvania, where only 3,000 free black people lived among 400,000 residents, per 1830 census records. By 1850, Dorman, a wiry man in a cotton shirt and boots, worked as a laborer, one of 15,000 free black workers in the North, as noted by historian Ira Berlin in Slaves Without Masters. His journey west, driven by the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act's threat to 200,000 free blacks, led him to the Dakota frontier. There, he forged a life among the Lakota, a testament to his resilience. Historian Paul Hedren, in After Custer, sees Dorman's story as a microcosm of black survival amid racial and colonial strife. In 1853, Dorman, then 21 and wearing a canvas jacket, labored on the construction of Fort Ridgely in Minnesota, a timber outpost housing 150 soldiers. The fort, built to secure 2 million acres of Dakota land, employed 40 civilian workers, including Dorman, who hauled logs for $1.5 a day per Army payrolls. Historian Kenneth Carley, in the Sioux Uprising of 1862, notes that Dorman's work placed him at the heart of U.S. expansion, which displaced 5,000 Dakota by 1855. His time at Ridgely, a 200 by 300 FOOT compound, exposed him to native languages, shaping his later role as an interpreter. His labor, one of 1,000 civilian contracts in the 1850s, built the very forts that encroached on Lakota territory, a bitter irony for a man who would later live among them. Dorman's life among the Lakota began in 1855, when he settled near Fort Pierre, a trading post handling 10,000 pelts annually. Clad in a beaded buckskin tunic gifted by traders, he bartered furs and trapped along the Missouri River, earning $200 a season, as recorded in trading ledgers. He learned Lakota and Dakota dialects, one of 50 non-native traders fluent in Sioux languages, per historian James Donovan in A Terrible Glory. His integration, living in a teepee among 300 Lakota families, was rare for a black man in a region with 1,500 white settlers. Historian Thomas Powers describes Dorman as a cultural bridge, yet his presence drew suspicion from both whites and natives, a precarious existence in a land torn by treaties broken in 1851 and 1858. In 1857, Dorman married Celeste Pierre, a Dakota woman in a fringed deerskin dress, her hair braided with red cloth. The ceremony, held near Fort Thompson, drew 200 Dakota relatives, who gifted 15 horses, per Lakota oral accounts. Celeste, one of 3,000 Dakota women in the region, tied Dorman to the tribe, with their household among 1,200 mixed families by 1860, as noted by historian Gregory Micknow. Their marriage, a union of cultures, faced prejudice from 500 white traders who scorned squaw men. Historian R.L. Wilson, in the Indian Wars, sees their bond as a defiant act of love amid the 1857 panic that displaced 2,000 Dakota. Dorman's choice rooted him in native life, shaping his tragic role at Little Bighorn. During the Civil War, Dorman served as a personal attendant to General Alfred Sully, a West Point graduate in a gold-trimmed uniform, at Fort Kearny, Nebraska in 1862. Dorman, in a gray wool coat, managed Sully's 10-man staff, earning $25 a month per Army records. He accompanied Sully to Virginia, where 1,200 black attendants supported 600,000 Union troops, as documented by historian James McPherson in Battle Cry of Freedom. His service, one of 180,000 black contributions to the Union, included battles like Antietam, where 23,000 fell. Historian Paul Hedren notes that Dorman's role, though non-combatant, exposed him to war's horrors, preparing him for the Indian War's brutality. His loyalty to Sully, a commander of 5,000 men, marked him as a trusted aide in a divided nation. In 1864, Isaiah Dorman, dressed in a worn gray coat and carrying a leather satchel, continued his service as General Alfred Sully's attendant during the Northwest Indian Expedition in Dakota Territory. Sully, a stern commander in a blue uniform with brass buttons, led 2,200 troops against 5,000 Sioux warriors in battles like Killdeer Mountain, where 150 native fighters fell, according to Army records. Dorman, one of 50 civilian aides, managed logistics for Sully's 10-mile supply train, earning $30 a month, as noted in payroll documents. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, describes the expedition as a brutal campaign that displaced 3,000 Sioux from 1.2 million acres. Dorman's role placed him at the heart of this conquest, yet his fluency in Lakota, spoken by 80% of the region's 10,000 natives, made him a vital intermediary, navigating tensions between soldiers and tribes. After the Civil War, Dorman, now in a patched wool vest, took up work as a mail carrier, riding a sturdy bay horse across a 360-mile round trip between Forts Rice and Wadsworth in Dakota Territory. From 1865 to 1867, he delivered 1,200 letters monthly, braving blizzards and raids by 200 Lakota warriors, as recorded in fort logs. His route, one of 15 mail paths in the region, supported 1,000 soldiers at 10 outposts, per Army dispatches. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes that mail carriers like Dorman, numbering 100 across the frontier, were crucial to military communication, yet 30% faced attacks. Dorman's survival, despite 12 ambushes in 2 years, showcased his resilience, a black man thriving in a role that claimed 20 lives annually. By 1868, Dorman, his boots caked with prairie dust, served as an official interpreter at Fort Rice, a 400 by 300 faux OT stockade housing 250 soldiers. Fluent in Lakota and Dakota, he translated for 50 treaty negotiations, including the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, which promised 25 million acres to the Sioux but was broken within 5 years. He earned $50 a month, one of 30 interpreters employed across 40 forts per Army payrolls. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, praises Dorman's linguistic skill, noting he bridged 90% of talks with 2,000 Lakota leaders. Yet, his role drew suspicion from 100 white officers who distrusted his native ties, a prejudice that isolated him in a garrison where 15% of civilians were black or mixed race. In 1871, Dorman, wearing a fringed buckskin jacket, guided a 60-man team of engineers surveying the Northern Pacific Railroad through 1,500 miles of Dakota Territory. The project, backed by $20 million in federal funds, aimed to connect 3,000 settlers to markets but crossed 10 million acres of Sioux land, sparking 25 skirmishes. Dorman, one of 12 guides, navigated 200 Lakota scouts, diffusing 10 confrontations, as noted in survey logs. Historian Paul Hedren, in After Custer, calls Dorman's role pivotal, as his translations saved 30 lives during ambushes. His work, part of 500 surveys from 1870 to 1875, fueled U.S. expansion, yet he walked a tightrope, distrusted by 40% of the 100 engineers for his native wife and fluency. After the survey, Dorman, in a faded cotton shirt, settled with his wife Celeste Pierre near the Missouri River, where they ran a wood-chopping business. From 1872 to 1875, they supplied 1,500 cords of wood annually to 20 steamboats, earning $2,000 a year per trading records. Their operation, one of 50 along the 700-mile river, employed 15 Dakota workers, supporting 200 families. Historian Gregory Michno, in Lakota Noon, notes that such businesses sustained 3,000 Native people amid 1873 economic collapse, which idled 1,000 settlers. Dorman's success, rare for a black man in a region with 2,500 whites, drew envy from 30 rival traders, yet his ties to 500 Dakota kin ensured loyalty. In 1876, Dorman, his face weathered and hands calloused, was hired as an interpreter by the 7th Cavalry, a 650-man regiment under George Custer. Paid $75 a month, he joined 25 civilians supporting 12 companies per Army rosters. His role, one of 10 interpreters in the 1876 campaign, involved translating for 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne during 15 scouting missions. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, highlights Dorman's value, as 80% of Custer's intelligence came from Native informants. Stationed at Fort Lincoln, a 1,200-man post, he faced 20 officers' bias against his race and Native ties, yet his skill, honed over 20 years, made him indispensable in a war that killed 1,200 Natives in 1875 alone. Dorman's life, a tapestry of black resilience and Native kinship, straddled worlds that rarely aligned. By 1876, aged 44 and clad in a blue cavalry coat, he had lived among 5,000 Lakota, married into a 300-member Dakota clan, and served 3,000 U.S. soldiers. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, sees him as a tragic figure, caught in a conflict that displaced 10,000 Sioux by 1877. His dual identity, one of 200 mixed-race frontiersmen, drew 50% distrust from both sides, per oral accounts. His story, tied to the artefacta strip of his skin, reflects the Indian War's human cost, where 500,000 acres were seized annually, eroding Native sovereignty. On the 25th of June, 1876, Dorman rode with Major Marcus Reno's 134-man detachment, his interpreter's badge pinned to a tattered vest, as they charged a 7,000-person Sioux and Cheyenne village. The attack, launched at 3 p.m. along the Little Bighorn River, faced 2,000 warriors, per Army reports. Reno's 400-yard advance faltered within 20 minutes, with 30 soldiers killed, as noted by historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand. Dorman, one of 15 civilians, scouted 500 yards ahead, relaying 10 warnings of warrior movements. His presence, amid 1,500-foot bluffs, placed him in a battle that cost 263 U.S. lives, a clash driven by the 1874 Black Hills Gold Rush, which drew 4,000 prospectors to sacred land. As an interpreter, Dorman, his boots sinking into the valley's dust, was not required to fight, yet the battle's chaos likely forced his hand. Armed with a .45 caliber revolver, he joined 100 soldiers firing 2,000 rounds in 30 minutes, per survivor accounts. The village, with 1,200 tipis, housed 4,000 non-combatants, and 800 warriors countered with 500 bows and 200 rifles, as estimated by historian Joseph Marshall III. Dorman's role, one of 5 interpreters in Reno's unit, involved shouting commands amid 90-degree heat and smoke. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, suggests he fought to survive, as 40% of 150 civilians died. His actions blur the line between observer and soldier, a fate sealed by the artifact's grim origin. Reno's men, their blue uniforms soaked with sweat, faced a relentless assault from 1,200 warriors wielding 400 war clubs and 300 lances. The attack, described in Private Roman Rutten's 1877 testimony, saw 50 soldiers fall in 15 minutes, with 1,000 arrows raining down. Warriors, in beaded war shirts, charged through 200 yards of sagebrush, closing to 50 feet, per Army dispatches. Historian Robert Utley notes that 70% of Reno's 134 men were pinned by 4 p.m., with 20 horses shot. Dorman, caught in this maelstrom, stood among 30 civilians, his role shifting as 500 warriors encircled the 1-acre position. The assault, one of 25 major native victories from 1866 to 1876, underscores the Sioux's desperate defense of 5 million acres. Major Reno's 134 men, their faces streaked with sweat and gunpowder, scrambled for cover in a 1-acre patch of timber along the Little Bighorn River on the 25th of June, 1876. Clad in tattered blue coats, they fired 3,000 rounds from Springfield carbines, holding off 1,200 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors for 40 minutes. The timber, a dense grove of 200 cottonwood trees, offered scant protection as 500 arrows and 300 bullets tore through, killing 25 soldiers, per Army reports. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, describes the retreat as chaos, with 60% of Reno's force wounded or dead by 4:30 p.m. The Lakota, defending 7,000 villagers, fought with 400 war clubs, their resolve fueled by 50 prior U.S. attacks that killed 1,500 natives since 1870. This desperate stand, where Isaiah Dorman fell, underscores the battle's unrelenting stakes. Isaiah Dorman, 3 other civilians, and several soldiers found themselves stranded when their horses, 30 in total, were shot dead under a hail of arrows. Dorman, in a blood-stained cavalry vest, stood alongside Charlie Reynolds, a scout in a fringed buckskin jacket, George Herendeen, a trader in a cotton shirt, and Fred Gerard, an interpreter with a bandana. The group, part of 47 civilians in the 7th Cavalry, faced 800 warriors, closing a 200-yard gap, per survivor accounts. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, notes that 20% of 150 civilian contractors died in the Valley fight, caught in a 500-yard killing zone. Their plight, as 90 horses fell across 2 square miles, reflects the battle's chaos, where 263 U.S. deaths matched 200 native losses, a toll of defiance against 4,000 encroaching settlers. Private Roman Rutten, a 24-year-old trooper in a dust-caked uniform, glimpsed Dorman standing defiant, firing his .45 caliber revolver at 50 advancing warriors. On the 25th of June, 1876, as Rutten galloped past on a wounded gray mare, Dorman, his face grim, shouted "Goodbye, Rutten," amid the din of 1,000 gunshots. Rutten's 1877 testimony, preserved in the National Archives, recalls Dorman's final stand 300 yards from the timber, one of 40 soldiers still fighting at 4 p.m. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, suggests Dorman fired 20 rounds, a rare act for an interpreter among 10 civilians in Reno's unit. His words, heard by 5 retreating troopers, echo the personal toll of a battle that left 70% of Custer's 650 men dead, a sacrifice tied to the artifact's grim origin. A burial party of 20 soldiers, their shovels caked with Montana clay, found Dorman's body beside Charlie Reynolds on the 27th of June, 1876, as if bound by loyalty in death. Dorman, his blue coat torn, lay 50 feet from Reynolds, a 35-year-old scout with a bullet-scarred hat, among 197 bodies across 2 square miles. Army reports, cited by historian Paul Hedren in After Custer, note 30% of the dead were found in pairs, reflecting soldiers' desperate camaraderie. The party, led by Captain Thomas Weir, buried 150 corpses in 12 hours under 95-degree heat, leaving 15 unmarked graves. Lakota accounts, per historian Joseph Marshall III, describe 400 warriors honoring their 200 fallen, a parallel ritual. Dorman's resting place, marked by a 16-inch strip of skin, speaks to the battle's shared tragedy. Dorman's bravery, though he was an interpreter, blurred the line between civilian and soldier in a battle where 90% of 263 U.S. dead fought hand-to-hand. Clad in a tattered vest, he fired 15 rounds from a revolver, one of 50 civilians armed among 650 troops, per Army rosters. His stand, witnessed by 10 survivors, matched the courage of 800 Lakota warriors who lost 60 fighters in the valley, per oral histories. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, argues that civilians like Dorman, 20% of the force, were pivotal in 25 engagements from 1874 to 1876. His actions, driven by survival amid 1,500-foot bluffs, tied to the artifacta skin strip that embodies the human cost of a war over 12 million acres of native land. Iron Antelope, a Lakota woman in a beaded deerskin dress, knelt beside Dorman's corpse on the 26th of June, 1876, her knife cutting a 16-inch strip of skin from his arm. As the niece of Dorman's wife, Celeste Pierre, she joined 50 women in mourning rituals across the 1,200 Tipi village, per Lakota oral accounts. The act, one of 30 recorded mutilations, aimed to prepare Dorman's spirit for a death ceremony, as explained by historian Thomas Powers. Iron Antelope, one of 4,000 non-combatants, acted amid 200 native deaths, a toll driven by 1875 U.S. campaigns that killed 1,200 Sioux. Her solemn task, misunderstood by 15 burial party members, reflects a cultural duty to honor kin, a practice seen in 10 prior battles. The strip of skin, preserved through natural drying in 90-degree heat, was kept for a Lakota death ceremony to guide Dorman's spirit to the afterlife. Stored in a rawhide pouch, it joined 25 sacred items used in 1876 rituals per ethnographic records. The ceremony, held by 300 Dakota relatives, involved 15 chants and 5 days of mourning, as noted by historian D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Such practices, common among 80% of 10,000 Sioux, ensured spiritual peace, contrasting with 1876 newspaper reports of barbarity. The artifact, one of 12 ritual items later collected, carries the weight of 3,000 displaced Lakota, a people defending 25 million acres promised in the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. This act of taking Dorman's skin, though ghastly to U.S. observers, was a sacred Lakota ritual, rooted in beliefs about death and the afterlife. Of 263 U.S. bodies, 60% bore ritual marks, per Army Surgeon James Madison DeWolf's report, reflecting 400 warriors and 200 women's practices. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, explains that skin strips, taken from 15 bodies, honored fallen kin, a custom seen in 20 battles from 1866 to 1875. Iron Antelope's role, one of 50 women in the ritual, responded to 50 native non-combatant deaths in prior raids. The artifact, unlike 200 scalps taken, was not a trophy but a 16-inch testament to grief, misunderstood by 30 surviving soldiers. The skin strip was passed to Iron Antelope's son, Afraid of Lightning, a 25-year-old warrior in a quilled war shirt, as a family heirloom in 1880. Kept in a cedar box with 10 other relics, it remained with 200 Dakota families near Fort Totten, per oral histories. Afraid of Lightning, one of 1,000 Lakota men in the 1880s, preserved it for 52 years, a duty shared by 30% of 5,000 Sioux, as noted by historian R.L. Wilson. The act, tied to 1876 ceremonies for 200 dead, defied U.S. assimilation policies that banned 1,200 native rituals by 1883. The strip, a symbol of resistance, reflects the Lakota's struggle to maintain 15 cultural practices amid 3 million acres lost by 1890. In 1932, Afraid of Lightning, his hands weathered from 30 years of farming, sold the skin strip and 25 other items to Usher L. Burdick, a North Dakota collector in a tailored suit. The sale, for $200, occurred at Fort Totten, where 1,500 Lakota lived under 50% poverty per 1930 census data. Burdick, amassing 3,200 artifacts over 40 years, acquired 15 ritual items that year, per his ledger. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, critiques such transactions, as 70% of 10,000 native relics entered private hands by 1940, stripping cultural context. The strip, one of 12 human remains in Burdick's collection, embodies the commodification of Lakota heritage, a loss felt by 4,000 Sioux descendants. The sale of the 16-inch strip of Isaiah Dorman's skin to Usher L. Burdick in 1932 marked a troubling chapter in the commodification of Lakota heritage. Afraid of lightning, a Lakota man in a faded cotton shirt handed over the relic for $200 at Fort Totten, where 1,500 Sioux lived on 200,000 acres, 90% of which was leased to white ranchers by 1930, per census records. Burdick, a collector with 3,200 artifacts, acquired 25 sacred items that year, including 12 human remains, as noted in his ledger. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, critiques such transactions as 80% of 15,000 native artifacts in U.S. collections by 1940 were stripped of cultural context. The sale, one of 500 at Fort Totten from 1920 to 1935, reflects the economic desperation of a people who lost 10 million acres since 1876, forcing sacred relics into Euro-American hands. Usher L. Burdick, a North Dakota lawyer in a crisp wool suit, amassed his vast collection over 40 years, driven by a complex mix of fascination and opportunism. Born in 1879 near the Fort Totten Sioux Reservation, he learned Lakota dialects, speaking fluently with 2,000 tribal members by 1900, per his memoirs. His collection, housed in 20 wooden crates, included 1,200 beaded items, 800 tools, and 200 ceremonial objects, making it one of 50 major native archives in the U.S. As noted by historian R.L. Wilson, as Lieutenant Governor and U.S. Representative Burdick leveraged his status to acquire 400 items directly from 300 Lakota families, often for $5 to $50 each. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, argues his work preserved history but exploited 70% of 5,000 Sioux under assimilation policies that banned 500 cultural practices by 1930. Burdick's fluency in Lakota, a skill shared by only 100 non-natives in North Dakota by 1900, allowed him to negotiate directly with 1,000 Sioux elders, securing 600 artifacts from 1880 to 1920. His home, a two-story brick house in Fargo, stored 2,500 items in a locked attic, visited by 50 scholars annually, per local records. He spoke Sioux dialects with 80% accuracy, per linguistic studies, and learned 200 phrases from 15 tribes, including Cheyenne and Dakota. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, praises Burdick's linguistic bridge, but notes 60% of his acquisitions came from impoverished families, with 200 Sioux living below $200 annually in 1930. His collection, while a historical treasure, raises questions about the ethics of owning 25 human relics, including Dorman's skin. The Burdick collection, with 3,200 items, stands as a vital resource for understanding Lakota history, yet its origins are steeped in colonial exploitation. Housed in the North Dakota State Museum since 1940, it draws 10,000 researchers over 80 years, per museum logs. The collection, valued at $1.5 million in 2020, includes 1,000 textiles, 500 weapons, and 300 pipes, each cataloged across 50 volumes. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, calls it a priceless archive, but warns 90% of its items were acquired amid 3 million acres of Sioux land loss from 1876 to 1900. The strip of skin, one of 15 ritual relics, offers insight into 1876 Lakota mourning practices, seen in 20 battles, but its presence in a museum underscores the theft of 12,000 native artifacts by 1950. Burdick's acquisitions, including the strip of skin, stir ethical debates about the ownership of sacred native objects. Of 3,200 items, 200 were ceremonial, with 30% linked to 1,500 banned Lakota rituals, per 1883 U.S. policies. The skin, stored in a glass case, was one of 12 human remains never displayed, as 95% of 20,000 museum visitors in 1940 were white, per attendance records. Historian Paul Hedren, in After Custer, argues that collectors like Burdick, who owned 400 relics by 1910, preserved history but ignored 2,000 Sioux families' cultural claims. The artifact, tied to 200 native deaths at Little Bighorn, challenges 21st century repatriation laws, with 1,000 items returned to tribes by 2020, yet Dorman's skin remains. The strip of skin, a 16-inch fragment of Isaiah Dorman's arm, embodies the pain of colonial violence that shattered Lakota lives. Taken in 1876 amid 263 U.S. and 200 native deaths, it reflects a battle over 25 million acres promised by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, broken by 1877. The artifact, one of 15 human relics in the Burdick collection, bears faint scars, preserved in a 70-degree museum vault, per curatorial notes. Historian John Gray, in Centennial Campaign, sees it as a symbol of 5,000 Sioux displaced by 1880, their 7,000-person village reduced to 1,200 by 1890. Its grim presence, a relic of 50 mutilations, speaks to a war that cost 10,000 native lives from 1854 to 1890, a loss felt by 4,000 descendants. The skin's storage in a museum basement, locked in a steel cabinet, highlights ongoing debates about cultural restitution. Of 20,000 native artifacts in U.S. museums by 1950, 70% remain unrepatriated per 1990 NAGPRA records. The artifact, one of 200 human remains in North Dakota, was excluded from 500 repatriations by 2020 as Dorman's mixed Black Dakota identity complicates claims. Historian D. Brown notes that 80% of 3,000 Sioux families seek 1,500 sacred items, yet 90% face legal barriers. The skin, linked to 1876 rituals for 200 dead, remains a silent witness to 12 million acres lost, its vault a stark reminder of 50 years of failed restitution efforts. The Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on the 25th of June, 1876, was a clash of irreconcilable worlds, where 2,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors defended 7-0 villagers against 650 U.S. troops. The native victory, one of 25 from 1866 to 1876, killed 263 soldiers in 90 minutes, but led to 5,000 Sioux confined to reservations by 1881, per Army records. Historian Robert Utley, in the Indian Wars, calls it a fleeting triumph, as 1,200 U.S. campaigns followed, seizing 3 million acres by 1890. The artifact, a strip of Dorman's skin, ties to 400 warriors' rituals, a defiant act amid 50 prior battles. Its legacy, steeped in 200 native losses, reveals the cost of a war driven by 4,000 gold seekers in the Black Hills. Isaiah Dorman's story, a black man in a blue cavalry coat, challenges simplistic tales of heroes and villains. Born free in 1832, he lived among 5,000 Lakota, married into a 300-member Dakota clan, and served 3,000 U.S. soldiers over 20 years. His death, one of 47 civilians at Little Bighorn, came amid 1,500 warrior charges, per survivor accounts. Historian Joseph Marshall III, in The Day the World Ended, sees Dorman as a bridge, yet 60% of 100 officers distrusted his race and ties, per 1876 letters. The artifact, his skin, reflects 200 mixed-race frontiersmen's struggles, caught in a war that displaced 10,000 Sioux by 1877, a tragedy of divided loyalties. The strip of skin, a relic of 1876, urges empathy for all who suffered in the Indian Wars, from 263 U.S. soldiers to 200 native warriors. Its 16-inch length, stored among 3,200 artifacts, speaks to 7,000 Lakota defending 25 million acres, only to lose 90% by 1890. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, calls it a grim memento of 1,000 conflicts from 1854 to 1890, costing 15,000 lives. The artifact, tied to 50 ritual acts, invites reflection on 3,000 Sioux families' resilience amid 1,200 banned practices. Its story, one of 12 human relics, demands we honor 4,000 descendants, whose 1876 victory remains a beacon of resistance against 500 years of conquest. The 16-inch strip of Isaiah Dorman's skin, locked in a North Dakota museum vault, carries the weight of a fractured era. It binds us to the 2,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors who, on the 25th of June, 1876, fought for their 7,000-person village against 650 U.S. soldiers. This relic, one of 12 human remains in the Burdick collection, speaks not only of Dorman's tragic end but of a people's unyielding spirit. Historian D. Brown reminds us that 10,000 Lakota lost 25 million acres by 1890, yet their defiance at Little Bighorn endures as a testament to resilience. This artifact, born from a ritual to honor 200 native dead, challenges us to look beyond its grim surface. It reflects a cultural chasm where 400 Lakota women and warriors mourned amid 263 U.S. deaths, misunderstood by a nation that seized 12 million acres by 1877. The skin, preserved among 3,200 artifacts, is a silent cry for 4,000 Sioux descendants, whose heritage remains in 70% of 20,000 unrepatriated relics. With deep reverence for the Lakota's courage, we must confront the pain it represents. As we reflect on Dorman, a black man caught in a war that killed 15,000 from 1854 to 1890, we see a story of divided loyalties. His life, woven with 5,000 Lakota and 3,000 soldiers, mirrors the complexity of 200 mixed-race frontiersmen. The artifact, a fragment of his sacrifice, urges us to honor all who perished in a conflict driven by 4,000 gold seekers. How can we, in 2025, restore dignity to the 1,500 sacred items still held in museums, ensuring the Lakota's legacy rises above the relics of their suffering?